Jeff is with Larimer County Natural Resources, and they're working on a lot of urban projects. And our next session is on the urban river.
All right, we're going to shift back to a local government perspective now and have more of a casual living room conversation here with leaders from 3 of the major cities and towns within the Poudre watershed. The theme we're going to focus on today, actually there's 3 themes. First of all is economic development opportunities that are happening in what we're calling the urban river. So we haven't talked about geography at all today, but probably everyone knows Poudre River starts up in Rocky Mountain National Park as a spring, just north of Trail Ridge Road, flows through Roosevelt National Forest, exits the canyon, goes through LaPorte. And as you can tell from the graphic, pretty much everywhere downstream is within a city or town limit. And these are just current city and town limits. Earlier today, we talked a little bit about urban growth boundaries and the potential for these cities to get larger. So essentially, the river is going to be flowing through, now there is some unincorporated land, but essentially it's going to be flowing through city or town land until it gets to the South Platte River. So this is a really important part of the watershed. And today we wanted to talk about any economic development opportunities that are happening within the city and towns. We also want to talk about river health. We've already seen a short video on the removal of the Josh Ames ditch, so we know that's happening in Fort Collins, but what about in Greeley and in Timnath? Are there any river health initiatives occurring there? And then finally, the last thing that we want to talk about is recreation. We know that the Poudre River is a big draw for recreation, whether you're an angler, whether you love to raft down the Poudre, or even just bike along the Poudre River Trail. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that come with managing recreation on the Poudre through these cities and towns. And I'd like to introduce my panel. April Getchis is the town manager at the town of Timnath. Becky Safarick is the assistant city manager at Greeley. And John Stokes is the director of the Natural Areas Department in Fort Collins. So first question, it's going to be a softball question. Let's imagine I'm in a canoe and I'm floating through the Poudre River in your city or town. What do I see? What's the river like through your city or town?
Hi. So what's the river like through Fort Collins? Well, probably a lot of you know what it looks like already through Fort Collins. It's pretty diverse. There's a lot of open space along the river, so we have many natural areas that are conserved and protected by the city of Fort Collins. In fact, about 65% of the floodplain is owned and managed by the city of Fort Collins, either in our park system or our natural areas system. We're going to get to this in a few minutes, but you might notice some new development in our downtown corridor, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And you would also notice a lot of old gravel mining reservoirs or pits. That's an artifact really almost of history in Fort Collins, because a lot of the mining in town has been completed, but it's a big part of our river system, and we'll talk some more about that as well.
Well, I'm probably the smallest community along this stretch, but if you're coming down your canoe and going through Timnath, I hope you stop at Walmart and Costco. The river comes through around the Walmart area. So that's what we're referring to as the Gateway Pond, because the Walmart pond sounded tacky. So this will be a trailhead eventually, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the river comes through around this pond. It's just actually to the right of the picture, and ultimately past Sweatsville Zoo, which is not in the town of Timnath, but again, so you'll see variety of sculpture work as you're coming through, and then ultimately flows along that southwestern border of Timnath and on past the community. And we're going to talk about development and those kinds of things that are happening there, that we hope will be able to foster some more activity along this stretch of the river.
And in the Weld County section, I think you'll find it's a combination of experience that you have with the river. For the most part, on the high plains, we're seeing the river in a rural landscape, although it interfaces in our community in ways associated with a Poudre Learning Center, also with the town of Windsor, and in the north part of Greeley, much of our industrial and urban development there. Although most of the landscape that we've protected and the trail is really much more rural and very low-lying areas, a lot of habitat and open space it's pretty gentle in our corridor. So as we talk about development and what happens from there, much of it will be our discussion of the human interface and how it's evolving in terms of our river corridor.
Great, thank you. So let's move on to economic development. You know, if you drive around the watershed, if you're in Fort Collins, you're going to encounter road closures on Mulberry. There's some development happening there. If you drive through Timnath, Harmony Road's changed quite a bit in the last year or so. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in your communities from an economic development perspective. What should we expect in the future?
In Fort Collins, we have a lot going on in the river corridor in terms of economic development. This is a slide of the Woodward Governor corporate headquarters project. They are building a new corporate headquarters at the old Lincoln Greens golf course location near downtown. And that was about a 101-acre site, and about 70 acres of that will be developed into Woodward's new corporate headquarters. And Woodward gave 30 acres of that property to the city to be incorporated into our natural area system and also into the floodplain, excuse me. So it's a really cool project. It's an economic development project, but it's also a habitat restoration. It has a significant habitat restoration component as well. So that's a big project for us. Another theme in Fort Collins, and this is our downtown river district, and the river's there on the right side of the slide, and that blue area is an area that's really undergoing a lot of transformation right now. There is a ton of redevelopment happening in downtown Fort Collins near the river, and we call this area the River District. And we have, for example, on Block 1, which is the original platted block in the city of Fort Collins, at the intersection of Linden and the river, we have a brand new office and residential / commercial space there called Encompass. And that the city plan calls for development right on the river in that location. So we have a new building there that's really quite spectacular if you haven't had a chance to see it yet. And there's a variety of other activity in this area that's being planned or that is actually happening right now. There's a lot of energy in Fort Collins around the downtown river area, and so we see developers and businesses being attracted to that and wanting to be there. So it's quite vibrant right now, and I could give you other examples, but in any case, the long story short is that the river in Fort Collins has traditionally been a locus for business. That's where we had our original mills, that's where we had industry, and we have new kinds of industry coming to that area, new kinds of commercial activities. But it's very much in the tradition of the past, although I will say this, we're not quite turning our back on the river in the way that we used to. We're really trying to integrate the river experience into these redevelopments and new developments.
Well, as everyone knows or may not know, but Timnath is growing very, very rapidly. We've not really embraced the river to a large degree yet, but we have big plans. This is just some excerpts from our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space and Trails Plan, our PROS plan. And although most, if not all, communities have these, our plan specifically talks about the Poudre River Trail as an economic development boon for our community. The Gateway Pond that I showed you earlier, we're looking at as a trailhead, as a destination, and as an economic stopping point for bicyclists and other recreators coming through there. Ultimately, we would like to do development along that area. We are in the process of the town now engaging on a visioning study to see what that's going to look like, so that we can actually articulate clearly to folks what the development potential is in that area, while respecting the recreation component of the river and the trail system. We also have a very small, old downtown that will be seeing redevelopment over the years soon. And linking that community to the river is going to be vital in both for our residents and their quality of life, as well as the PROS plan specifically calls out that connection to the trail and to the river area is vital for the vitality and the success of businesses in Old Town. This is an old rendering, but it shows the potential of incorporating both a trail along the river and commercial and multiple family development that would overlook the river and, as John says, embrace the river rather than turning our back. If you look on that property, you look out over the river and up toward the mountains. I mean, you can't get a much prettier view than that. So those are the kinds of things that we have long-term that we think is a real opportunity. I'll say one more thing is that in relation to this development and the kind of opportunities that we have, what we're seeing in Tinmouth is, we talked about quality of life issues earlier. We're seeing folks move to Tinmouth, and we had, up until recently, our main restaurant was the Subway inside Walmart, and so we're really climbing up in the world. But in the same vein, we've got residents who are coming there who have expectations about services and quality of life that we haven't yet had the opportunity to build on, and this kind of development and the river provides us some of that additional opportunity. The question is, what is the orientation? That is Harmony on the north and County Road 5 on the left-hand side, on the west side.
There you go. And for Greeley, I think one of the things I wanted to share with you in terms of the urban development that we experience is that much of what's happening along the Greeley corridor is that we are seeing gravel mining activity. And this presents phenomenal opportunities for the human interface in advance of urban development. We do have urban development in, of course, both the town of Windsor, but also in the Greeley area, in mostly our downtown. But much of the river in the Greeley stretch is just north of the urbanized area. So what we're seeing is, with, of course, the current development, with development that requires paving and such, is that there's an awful lot of gravel mining operations. So what happens for us, or right now the opportunity, is that we're able to convert much of the open space areas that are resulting from the gravel pits into new habitats and areas where we can really explore the community in a different way. On the bottom right picture is a reservoir, a Sebring Reservoir, which is also the site that we have our Poudre Learning Center on. It becomes a place for humans to interface with the river in a really meaningful way. This happened to be a day that we bring folks out to the river for educational venues, and this happened to be what we call our Poudre Trail Athlon, where we had bird watching among 8 or 9 different stations. 38 species of birds were viewed in 3 hours' time on this reservoir. So it really gave people a chance to experience, that are just a mile or two away from this area, the real experience of what can happen out on the river area. On the next slide, I think you also see, again, with that Poudre Learning Center, this is an opportunity for us to help people understand the river in a bigger way. And so through environmental education at the Learning Center, we have opportunities for people to understand the context of the river in terms of the fact that it's an entire system. As we talk about the river through each of our communities, it's so important that we each maintain its ability to flow carefully and fully through our areas and be preserved, so everyone downstream, and we're the ones downstream, can really benefit from that. On the bottom slide are folks, actually school children, that are out exploring what the area is like around that reservoir, understanding what the soils are like, what habitat is like. It gives us a lot of chances for defining eco points and field work that you could otherwise not see as clearly. And on the next slide, much of what you see here is just, again, the fact that as it goes through the Greeley stretch, we really have a working river. We have folks that are still using the river for agricultural purposes and for, again, as mining. But the rural landscape in Greeley is really what the interface is for much of the river. And our goal here is to appreciate that as urban development comes closer to the river, that we find ways to make that work a little bit more effectively.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to follow up a question with John about this new economic development activity along the river. Of course, with development along the river comes some risks. Every June, there's going to be a rise in water. Was there any, did you have to shape, are the developments in Fort Collins, were they reshaped at all in response to the September flood from 2013?
So the answer to that question is no. We actually did pretty well in the flood in 2013. we had about, I think it was a period of record 50-year flood, so it wasn't a 100-year flood. We model and plan for the 100-year flood on our river, and that's a standard that other communities follow as well. Anybody that wants to develop anywhere near or on or in the floodplain has to comply with pretty rigorous standards that are imposed by the federal government as well as the city of Fort Collins. One of our advantages in 2013 is the fact, and I alluded to this earlier, or mentioned earlier, is that we own about 65–70% of the floodplain through Fort Collins. And so those areas can flood. That's fine. We're okay with that. And I think it helped us out a lot in 2013.
Good. Well, you know, with additional development along the Poudre, we're drawing more people to the Poudre, and they want to see a clean river. They want to see wildlife. So let's transition into this environmental side of the discussion. We understand that there's quite a bit of land protection along the Poudre in Fort Collins. What else are your communities doing to make sure that we have a healthy river through your towns and cities?
I would. If the next slide that we have offers exactly what we're trying to do to imagine those regional possibilities that will allow us to help maintain those areas that are really special. And this is just a working tool that we have to identify along the corridor what sorts of possibilities exist. We know that the river, for example, has a number of different possibilities, and as you've seen examples in Fort Collins and Timnath, that there's really urban interface that happens. There's also areas where it's really appropriate not to have urban interface, and we've got to find ways to make sure that for each of these stretches on the river that we're considering the special and unique attributes that each component has so that we can protect those, but also maximize the opportunity where appropriate for human interaction to occur, because that's where the advocacy really happens along the river as well. In the next slide, for example, one of the things that we know, particularly downstream, is that there are different seasons for the river and different ways to access it. There's times when the river's going to be quite full and flowing. There's other times when later in the season when we've got irrigation flows that affect that the river changes its personality. And so understanding it and working with it is really important. And the next slide, we also talk a little bit about the fact that Greeley's current initiative is to try to provide a buffer around our trail. We actually have a trail that runs 21 miles from the downtown to the west end of Windsor, and eventually we'll hook up to our friends with Timnath and Fort Collins. What we're doing right now, to your point about giving some buffer area for the river, is to really look for land uses and open space opportunities where we can buffer the trail that we have and buffer the river so that we really create some protection for the system that will allow the river to continue as it needs to and support the wildlife habitats as well as the river flows.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. We'll talk about the Poudre River Trail a little bit later, but I think in Fort Collins and west of I-25, there was land acquisition that occurred during trail construction. And then east of I-25, you guys did such a great job of getting 21 miles of trail built. And now you guys are having to go back and buy some additional land to protect that recreation experience. So it's a little bit different approach, but it's working out in both cases. Yeah. What about dry up spots? So I know in Fort Collins, that's a concern.
Maybe we can flip back to a few of the slides that I had here, Jeffrey. I know we're skipping around a little bit. And Amy Beatty was here earlier and talked a little bit about the Josh Ames project, and that's about habitat connectivity, about aquatic habitat connectivity in the river. So that dam was blocking, for example, the ability of fish to swim upstream. And we have that in other locations as well. So over time, we'd really like to work with ditch companies and water providers to provide bypass flows or fish passage structures in the river so we have this connectivity. We're actually doing a project right now with North Poudre Irrigation Company. Their structure down by Fossil Creek in the river blew out in the 2013 flood. A very, very large structure, much larger than the Josh Ames that we showed you earlier, and completely wiped out by the 2013 flood. And so when they rebuild that structure, probably next winter, we have cooperated with them to install fish passage in the structure. So we're really excited about that. And it protects their water rights and complies with FEMA regs, et cetera, et cetera. So another issue on the river are dry up points. And this is a photograph of a dry up on the Poudre River. So sometimes in the summer or in the late fall irrigation season, you'll see the river get dried up. And typically that's because people are delivering water perfectly in accordance with their water rights. And again, this is obviously a problem for fish and benthic invertebrates and other critters that like to live in the river. And so we'd like to mitigate these if we can going forward. So we've just completed a study on these. We have a better understanding of why they're there. And over time, hopefully we can mitigate this problem on the Poudre.
April, what about in Timnath?
We've not as much of a problem in terms of that I've seen in terms of dry up spots, but in terms of river health, doing a lot of the same things that both Greeley and Fort Collins are doing in terms of our comprehensive plan and designating greenways along the river so that area is protected. We're very fortunate that we don't have a lot of homes in the river's floodplain or a lot of structures. In September of 13, we were very fortunate that the biggest impact from the flood, frankly, was some land that was flooded, but it was primarily because 25 was closed, and we actually had bumper-to-bumper traffic through downtown Timnath, which was a real different scene. But having that, being able to have that protection, and knowing that in our situation, for example, we have the room to work with now because we don't have some existing urbanization right up against the river is going to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments about river health that you guys want to bring up?
I don't think so, not right now.
Okay.
I'm good, yeah.
So let's shift to recreation then. So we've mentioned the Poudre River Trail already once, and we've got 21 miles of intact trail from 392 in Windsor to Greeley. It's been there now for quite a few years. And then we have another section of trail that's west of I-25 from the Environmental Learning Center all the way to LaPorte. So the two trail systems don't currently connect. I think the audience is probably aware of that. So why not? You know, when's it going to be done?
John's fault.
Yeah, it's all my fault. So we're talking about the gap in the trail system, right? So you can ride your bike to the Environmental Learning Center in Fort Collins, and then somehow you've got to get downstream to where the trail picks up again down at the open space, River Bluffs open space that the county owns and manages. So we have a gap in there, and Timnath has been working very hard to close this gap. We've been working hard. Our job in the city of Fort Collins is to get the trail over, under, through I-25. And I-25 is proving to be difficult. At first we thought we would go over, but CDOT didn't like that very much, and that idea is not viable anymore. And we also thought about, of course, going under, but the problem with that idea is that it would be a very structural project underneath I-25 on the river itself, and the trail would be underwater probably for about 4 of the months that we'd like to use the trail. So right now we're stuck, and we're not sure exactly what we're going to be doing. We are hoping to build perhaps as early as this summer, or at least within the next year or so, the final trail connection from the ELC out to the Park and Ride at Harmony, for those of you who are familiar with the geography. From there, you can go over I-25 on Harmony. They're actually wide bike lanes, and it's set up for that. But as we all know, that's probably not the greatest experience for a biker or a hiker. So this is a long-term challenge for us in Fort Collins and really for the region, and we're not sure exactly right now how we're going to solve it. But we're really beating our heads against the wall, and we hope we can get that done, and some time frame that's not too far out there.
Sometime in your lifetime?
That would be good.
April, what about in Timnath? There's a section there too.
We have been working with the county and others. We have a GOCO grant that we're building that connection from the Gateway Pond that you saw. Ultimately, the Gateway Pond will be making further improvements there, and it'll be essentially a trailhead is what our hope is. From there, it will go under Harmony and across Sweatsville Zoo property, and then on the slide that I showed you with the potential development, will weave its way through this property, which is also ultimately a location for some new municipal buildings. From there, we have a gap that the county and Timnath are partnering with to work very closely to try and to make that connection. The trail itself won't, at least for some period of time, won't always follow the river, as beautiful as it is. It is an urbanized area, and a lot of it is property in negotiation with property owners. And so that presents its challenges. But ultimately, we will have the connection all the way to Greeley and Windsor, and we're looking forward to it. That construction is, as Jeffy knows because he's responsible for it, it will be underway in just a couple of weeks or so, and everything is in place. And but it takes a long time to build those connections and acquire those property and work with those property owners, and we're finding that ultimately it'll be wonderful, but it takes a long time.
You know, in the Greeley section, Jeffrey, you mentioned the point that we have the 21 miles of trail, and it took us about 17 years to do that. So to April's point, it's a long-term effort, and you really have to have a sustained vision and kind of that baton race leadership to make that happen. We have a couple of things that we're looking at too, and I might mention with that 17 miles of trail, or 17 years worth of 21 miles of trail, it was all done without purchasing any land to have those easements go through. So we did a lot of horse trading and working with landowners and trying to take advantage of best opportunities to make that happen. We now are looking at two other ways that we might enhance the trail experience. One is we're looking to move to the east to the confluence with the South Platte. That's taking some planning effort and also looking for similar opportunities. Floods oftentimes present those opportunities, and we'll be looking at ways that might happen. But we're also looking at water trails, and that might be a new thing for us as we look at ways that we can expand that recreational experience. Probably the best thing that we did in having this connected trail happen is we allowed people to fall in love with this river in a way that they had not been able to before. Because they're close to the river now, even though in some places it's a fairly narrow strip in between some industrial kind of applications like gravel mining, they can get from point A to point B. They can get to those really beautiful parts of the trail that have habitat and vistas and places for quiet reflection. And that's really making it possible for us to then create the public will to look for ways to find funding and support for that corridor that helps support the entire system. And eventually, when we can figure out that jump over I-25 and all the way to the east, I think we'll really see a trail that will, for pretty much in perpetuity, be that really special place that people talk about in northern Colorado all the time.
Yeah, and put the trail in perspective for us. How much use do you see on the trail in Greeley?
It's extensive. Part of the surprise for us is we were kind of astonished at how many people actually use it for commuter travel. It's a very comfortable trail. It's 10-foot wide, a concrete trail in Greeley. And so we have friends from Fort Collins and Larimer County, Timnath, the areas around Windsor, that actually get on the trail and come to work in downtown Greeley on a pretty regular basis, which makes for some interesting trail user conflicts and also opportunities when you got somebody blowing by somebody in a stroller or with rollerblades. That you have to kind of really be careful about sharing the trail. But we also put some counters out on the trail, and it was interesting for us in some summertime stretches that we have about 900 people on the trail in a day, and that's a lot of folks to kind of figure out how to make that work. And that's probably the word that we're going to work on in the coming years, is that equilibrium and balance of making sure that this is a trail for everybody, and how we respect those various users as we share the trail is going to be a big part of that, as well as the natural space around it.
Let's talk a little bit about water trails, because I know in Fort Collins, depending on where you are, you're going to see a lot of people. I think we've showed some images today of people on tubes floating down the Poudre, and there's definitely some challenges with that because the river oftentimes flows through private property. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Well, just like Fish Passage, we'd like to have Recreation Passage as well, and we'd like to do that in particular in downtown Fort Collins. And so we have a long-term vision of someone's ability to get in the river at Shield Street and to float right on through downtown. That's not possible right now because of diversions, and we have to respect those diversions and respect the Water Rights Administration that goes along with those diversions. So that's kind of a long-term challenge for us. And I don't know if it's okay right now, Jeffrey, but could I jump to the kayak park slide?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. This is something that I really wanted to talk about for just a minute. We have a project in downtown Fort Collins it's basically a three-part project. It's a project designed to mitigate flood damage or flood flows in downtown Fort Collins, to improve some habitat, and also to include some kayaking waves along with this kind of multimodal integrated project. So it's a really fantastic project. It's right by the Engines Lab. This is an image taken or drawn from the College Bridge. So if you're standing at College looking downstream, you'd see the Engines Lab on your right, or the Powerhouse Lab. And then this would be the redesigned river channel. There are a couple of things about this project that I want to point out for the water folks in the room. This is a run-of-the-river project, so the kayaking waves are not designed we don't need extra water for these kayaking waves to work. And in fact, we modeled these kayak waves with NISP on. So if Northern's project gets built, these waves are still going to be functional for us for about 40 days a year for a good kayaker. And then the rest of the time they'll be there for tubers. This will be a good fishing hole. It'll just be a nice place for people to hang out. It's about a $7.5 million project, and Fort Collins is going to provide about 80% of that funding, but the rest is going to be raised in a public-private partnership, and Carolyn Bradford is here today helping us with that, as well as a group of kayakers here, very ardent folks who have been helping us, and they are going way above and beyond the call of duty to help us put this project together. We couldn't do a project like this without the private sector and other public agencies partnering with us. So it's an integrated project. There's a lot going on here, and I just wanted to say a few things about it because it's been getting a certain amount of notoriety in the press, and sometimes people don't understand the project very well, so I appreciate this opportunity to say a few things about it.
Sure. Do you encounter, though, outside of this area where the river flows through private property, are you having any experiences where people are getting out and there's conflicts with private landowners?
That's happening upstream in the county.
Okay.
It doesn't happen as much in the city because most of the land in the city is publicly owned.
Okay.
But however, there is that conflict happening upstream between the mouth of the canyon and let's say Taft Hill on the west end of town. We know we have at least 500,000 people a year using the downtown river corridor at least. We've surveyed that, we know that.
Wow.
So it is extremely popular, and anybody come down to Fort Collins in a summer day, it's packed. That's posing certain challenges in terms of the infrastructure that we build, and I'm sure Becky actually kind of alluded to this. How do we create infrastructure that can accommodate that many people on our river? We're seeing some damage actually from heavy recreation use.
Here's your chance. Welcome to our living room. Any questions about the Poudre River through Greeley, Fort Collins, or Timnath?
So the question, I think I heard it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but when's the bike trail going to open on the west end of town? North end of town. Yeah, we've got several closures on the Poudre River bike trail in Fort Collins right now. It's probably going to be, I would say, mid-fall before that is going to be reopened. There's some major construction happening. Shields is being replaced, the bridge. And there's a big wastewater pipeline that's going in there, so there's just a ton of construction right there. And we have a lot of construction on the Poudre River right now through Fort Collins, and so we're having these intermittent closures, and it's very painful because people use that trail. I use it to commute to work. I cannot commute on the trail right now to get to my job, which is too bad, but it's just, we're going to get through it. Give us about another year, and we'll get through it. And it'll be better than it was before, I promise.
My name's Caroline Bradford, and I just wanted to ask you, John, if you could clarify the whole Poudre River master plan process that you guys have been going through all the way through downtown. What a big project that is, dollar-wise, river length-wise, and what kind of time frame you have for that project. I think that's something that would be good to put into context.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. Yeah, we completed in October, council adopted what we call the Poudre River Downtown Master Plan. And that's a plan that integrates all of these values that we've been talking about: recreation, aesthetics, habitat, stormwater mitigation, et cetera. So that's basically a 50-year plan. And it goes from Shield Street all the way over to Mulberry, that core part of the river in downtown Fort Collins. And we've identified literally dozens of potential improvements that could be made over time. The park, the image you see here, that's just one part, small part, really, of our vision for the river in downtown Fort Collins, which is why we're saying it's a 50-year plan. We're not going to get it done overnight. It's something that's going to take a number of years to complete. But it is gratifying to see small incremental steps of progress. Amy talked about that. I wish I had brought a slide for you. We did a project in the downtown corridor earlier this year or last year, a restoration project, and we were ripping old cars out of the river. And it was just really great to see that, to see the river getting cleaned up, getting all that old metal out of the, we recycled it, I promise. We took it to the recycling place. That's the kind of stuff that's happening on our rivers, I think, in all three of our communities. We're beginning to re-engage with our river environment, so that's great.
Great job, you guys. We have a lot of hope for the urban river. Let's thank them.